So very, very welcome to Dirty Salad Club. A couple of familiar faces here. I think there's a couple of people here for whom it's your first time here as well, if I'm not mistaken. So an extra special welcome. Dirty Salad Club is an initiative that we at KinchLyons set up during the beginning of the pandemic because we're all people and we had a panic about not being able to connect and speak to people for a long time. So we set up this initiative where initially we met once a week over the course of the pandemic. It's a forum for anybody who's involved in working in the people space in organizations. So most of us tend to be organizational psychologists, L&D practitioners, HR practitioners, executive coaches, life coaches, and we all get together. As I said, it was once a week initially when we first started. Now we're back to once a month. And we have a different topic and a different host when we meet every month. And it's anything, as I say, that's related to people and performance in the workplace. So anybody who's here for the first time, if you'd like to host a future session, we'd love to hear from you. You're very, very welcome to do so. The name Dirty Salad Club is somewhat unusual, people think, but it refers to the fact that, look, this is it's dirty, it's vulnerable, it's a space for us to talk to each other and maybe have conversations that we wouldn't have with our clients or colleagues, but that we feel safe having with other practitioners. Salad, it's healthy, it's good for us to learn from each other, and a club, look, there's similar professional interests among all of us. Today, we're very, very lucky to have our own Billy Byrne with us. Billy is a senior practitioner with EMCC, a very experienced executive coach, leadership development specialist, and a fountain of knowledge on all things related, if I can say so, Billy, to leadership and people development in organizations. So very, very lucky to have him with us here today. And without further ado, Billy, I'll allow you to take over from here.
Thank you, Tanya. So great to see so many faces, familiar and new faces as well. And I hope from the session that I'll be able to leave you with some takeaways. And that's my aim. I just going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to have my screen shared for most of the presentation. So I hope that's okay with you. So just give me one moment while I just get my screen sorted here a second. So yeah, I'm going to sorry, give me one moment again. This is my typical. Let's find the screen first. Here we are. Great. Okay. Hopefully you've got, let me see. Yes, hopefully you've got that. Yes. Great. Yeah. So understanding status quo binds to unlock innovation and growth. What I say is, like, this is the topic. I mean, I'm so curious about human behavior anyway. But this particular topic is kind of linking it into innovation and growth. But I think anytime you're dealing with change, whether it's in organization, individual change, health and well-being, whatever it is, I think there's the status quo bias is something which I've been fascinated by for a long time. And so I wanted to share some recent research with you, and also go back to some of the original research on this, and also share with you, I suppose, my own thinking on this. But before we do, I have a little visualization exercise that I would like to share with you if you're up for this, okay? Just a very short thing to do. So here we are. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Now, if you're not in Ireland, please don't worry about this. I've worded this like a mid-sized town in Ireland, and there's a specific reason. I'll come back to this later. But I want you to imagine a mid-sized town in Ireland. And on the main street, there's a mix of shops, restaurants, there's office buildings, pubs, residential buildings. There's a local school and a library close to the town centre. And families, students, business owners, and retirees all live in the town. Quite a mix. The town is a layout that makes it very easy to walk and cycle to most places people want to go. Pedestrians and cyclists are prioritised over motor traffic. And instead of a two-way car traffic on the main street, there's a one-way car lane with segregated lanes for cycling on each side. There are bike parking facilities outside most shops and businesses, together with wide pavements for pedestrians. And there are 3 disabled car parking spaces on the main street. The town square is open only to pedestrians and has benches, a fountain, and trees. And what I want to do, I'm going to ask Tanya to launch a poll on this. I want you to rate this on a scale of 1 to 7, from strongly dislike this to a 7 is strongly like. And I'd just like you to take part in the poll, if you would, please, on this. What do you think? We'll just give a little bit of time to do this. And a few more to come in. Great, thank you. Keep going.
There's just one more person to come in there, I think.
Okay.
If anyone hasn't responded, if you can't come in, if you can. Yep, there we go.
We got everybody. Okay. Can you share the poll, Tanya?
Yep, there we go.
Share the results. So just to see where we are. So in the 30% of people are neutral, 10% somewhat like, and 50% strongly like. Okay, so I hope you are curious after that. I'm going to come back to that later. Okay. So what I want to do next is just to give you a definition. When we're talking about status quo bias, what exactly are we talking about? And it's defined definition as the preference for maintaining one's current situation and opposing actions that may change the state of affairs. So, and it's actually different than reluctance to change, and we'll talk about that later. But the second piece, because this is back to the research, this is what the research questions around status quo bias mostly focus on. Like, does the framing of an alternative of a status quo affect the likelihood of it being chosen? And it does. So that's what it is. So how does that play out? And what I want to do is just take status quo bias, not as a single thing, which it isn't just a single, it is, they say status quo bias. But when we start unpacking it, like, what are some of the drivers here? And then if we know and understand what those drivers are, how can we use those in terms of our coaching practice, in terms of change, in terms of innovation, and things like that? So I'm just going to put it in context. If we have a choice between an A and a B, as you see on the screen, so if we just say, for example, you don't currently have a bank account, and I'll talk about bank accounts in a minute. But if you didn't have a bank account and you were about to open one, you'd look at, bank A and you'd look at bank B, and you'd make a choice between the two. However, if you already have a bank account and your bank account is bank A, actually your choice becomes different. And you actually ask yourself different questions. So the choice between A and B, if A is now a status quo, is different than just a straightforward choice between A and B. And on that, I'm going to have another poll just to link into that. And I'll ask Tanya to launch this as well. Just asking you about some of the changes you might or might not have made in the last 12 months. And I'll do this. And this is anonymous, so this is okay. Have you made any of the following changes in the last 12 months? Changed your current account, your bank, your mobile phone provider, your car insurance provider, your supermarket, or none of the above? And it's really just, have you changed any of them? And you can pick as many as you like in the responses there. Great, gosh, thank you. 10 or 12 people. And there's again, you can click multiple, you can make multiple choices. Okay, anyone else? There's a few more people if you want to come in. Yes, thank you. Great.
Okay, I'll share the results there, Billy.
Share the results. Share the results. Have you got the results? Sorry, I've lost it off my screen.
Yeah, they should be sharing there into the group if people can see them. Yeah. Okay.
So, and the reason I asked that, I mean, this is a relatively straightforward choice. If you change, we say, your bank or change, and you see a lot of people said there that, they didn't change any of those. And there could be good reason, but there's been some nice research on this just around banking. And this is from, so I need to close my screen here. This is from some work was done by the central bank back in 2022. Sample size 1,500 people asked about switching the current account. So about 11% said they considered switching their current account, but didn't do it, didn't follow through. 5% switched current account. 83% neither switched nor even considered switching in the past. And then 1% was no response. And that's on, you can go in and see that research on the central bank if you wish. And I mean, I'll have to say, put my hands up here. I've been with the same bank since 1987. Some of you, I'm not sure, have you even been born in 1987? But 1987, I can remember exactly, and I know there's a bigger event why I opened an account with that bank at that time. And that's one example of like status quo bias, where we just go along with the current situation. And it could also be the same with the mobile phone provider or something like that. And there's lots of things we just carry on, and we stay maybe loyal to far beyond the time when it makes logical sense or rational sense to do that. But the thing is, this goes far beyond just something like choosing a bank account. This comes into status quo bias is also a factor in big change. And that's why I want to come back to our visualization again. And you might have been asking, why was he asking us about this small town in Ireland? For some of you, by the way, who came in late, don't worry, we did a little visualization exercise of this small idyllic, I think, town in Ireland, where most people seem to like the sound of it. That's actually taken from an ESRI working paper. And it's on the website, by the way. It's great work done there by Pete Lunn and his team. And I would encourage you to look at the stuff that the ESRI publish on their website. There's some fascinating experiments and research done there that they've carried out, particularly on behavioral change. And they've done some work. This is an ESRI working paper. They presented this. I was at the conference last autumn when they presented this working paper. They were looking at what were the barriers when you want to introduce something like cycling lanes. And you can see at the moment there's a whole piece going on in Dublin city centre around, changing layouts and pedestrianisation. So what gets in the way? Why are people, maybe rightly so, you could argue, but also there seems to be a lot of negative reaction to change around, making the place more pedestrian friendly. And the paper is there, by the way, if you want to look at it. And part of the experiment, I won't go into the whole lot. It was very, very well constructed, and there's a lot more than what I'm going to show you. But effectively, they got their group of people. They divided it in two. Did a whole statistical mix, got the whole lot nicely. So you've got a control group, and your test group. And the first group were shown the description that you were shown. Exactly that description. That's why I said I had to say in Ireland, because I'm using the text that they actually use. So they gave this to half of the group and said, what do you think of this? Exactly as you did. And people rated it on a 1 to 7. But with the other group, and this is the clever part, they gave a slightly different description. They described it as a proposal rather than a status quo. In other words, rather than an existing, let's say, so not status, but an existing. So the small subtle changes were there, and I've outlined a few of them to talk about this. There is a proposal for a new layout. Pedestrian cyclists would be prioritized. There's a plan. Car parking spaces would be turned into bike parking facilities, and the town square would be pedestrianized. So now, this other group looking at exactly the same thing, but as a proposal, what do you think? Was the result of this the difference between the two? If you looked rationally, you might say, well, there shouldn't be much of a difference between the two. You're still describing the same town, but one is describing it as a current situation and one as a future situation. But lo and behold, there was a statistically large increase in the level of opposition. So the number of people who scored below 4 was below 10% when you gave them the description I gave you first. So it was below 10%. That was actually 25%. When it was presented as a proposal and a plan. And even more shocking, and again, in our little poll, I think quite a few people gave it a 7, like it very much. The number of people who gave it a 7 halved. So if you think about this, the number of people who are really, really in favor of it halved, and the number of people against it doubled, more than doubled. So this is, and the whole title of their paper was around looking at status quo bias affects how we make decisions and how we think about change. And in their case, it was about active travel. So what's going on? So really, there's a thing that happens here when we're looking at something that has no status quo versus something that has a status quo. And this is just a starting point for our kind of our discussion today. So when we look at something which doesn't have a status quo, go back to the A and the B. You know, you have no bank account, you're going to go to bank A or bank B. We look at the pros and the cons of both, and we compare like with like. However, we're more likely, if we have a status quo, not to ask those questions. What we tend to do is ask a question which is, to paraphrase, what could go wrong if things change? So like if you take traffic, is there going to be traffic disruption during the building of this? Will I still be able to get to the supermarket? So there's a lot of things come into this, and we ask very different questions whenever we have a status quo. So I want to go back from the very recent research from 2023 all the way back to Samuelson and Zeckhauser in 1988. Seminal paper. If you haven't read it, the references there, well worth a read. It's a lot in it as well. But they talk about, you know, SQB, status quo bias. And they said there's kind of three explanations. I think this is really valuable for anyone involved in change, anybody who's a coach, and anybody who's in any kind of organizational development. So they said, look, there's three things potentially which could be influencing status quo bias. And that's why I think unpacking this is so useful. So the first is, okay, you could have rational decision making. There could be genuine transition costs, and there's also uncertainty. So there's a rational element to this. It isn't all, you know, irrational. However, there can also be some cognitive misperceptions and also psychological commitment. So let's look at those one by one, just to see what we're talking about here. And hopefully this is useful. And you said we will be sharing the slides afterwards as well. So just think about transition cost. If I've got the status quo, there is something of a transition between getting the status quo to the new place. So there could be temporary disruption. So for example, go to an organizational setting. Like I've been using, let's say, a particular software package for many, many years, and suddenly the organization decides that's not supported anymore, we need to put in a new one, and I'm going to have to like learn something new. And I've actually invested so much time in learning the old system and really comfortable with it, and that's now gone, and I'm going to have to learn a whole new system. So there could be a transition cost. Temporary, but there is a transition cost. Also, there's uncertainty. Like I know what I've got, you know, the devil you know and the devil you don't know. So if I'm working again with a particular, you know, provider, let's say a software provider, I know how, you know, because I've been dealing with them for years, for example, I know how good or bad they are. There is some uncertainty. I can read the reviews and I can, you know, do some stuff, but I don't really have experience of, we say, another provider, just to take it in an organizational context. So there's genuine uncertainty that I have to deal with, and then there may be actual transition costs. But what about some of the others? And this is where we link across not just to status quo bias, but to some of the other writing, particularly around behavioral economics and behavioral science. So the first is in terms of loss aversion. This is from Kahneman and Tversky. A lot of you might have read Thinking Fast and Slow. We tend to weigh losses greater than gains. So if we see a loss of, we say, if you take in monetary terms, a loss of like €100 is far more painful to us than the pleasure we might get by getting €100. We tend to weigh losses. So if there's any kind of a loss, despite the future gain, you know, go back to the street scenario there, we're going to have nice town square, have that, but the losses, I would tend to put more emphasis on them. There's also, again, from Richard Thaler, another Nobel Prize winner, the endowment effect, where we place a higher value on what we have compared to what we would actually, you know, pay to buy something. And there's some great research on that. But just by having something, we place extra value on it compared to if we didn't own it, if it was just something out there or that something that was external to us. So there's an endowment effect we have to overcome. There's also anchoring. And I mean, that's such a well-documented bias as well, where, you know, whatever's the initial condition, we tend to hold to that. And this can hold us back. If you think about innovation, for example, you know, we kind of tend to stay with the tried and tested, and we're anchored to it. And also we say with, you know, in any kind of, if you talk health and well-being, or any time we're trying to get people to make a change in lifestyle, there is an anchoring maybe back to what the current situation is. And then, of course, our old friend down to rationality, we will only give it so much time and consideration anyway. So if we're really weighing up something like we're saying new traffic layout, we'll pick 2 or 3 things and we'll use those as our assessment criteria. Then the other piece, the psychological commitment, there's a few things here. There could be misperceived sunk costs, where like there can be genuine sunk costs, the investment, but it can be, we've had previous commitments to something, whether it is to a team or whether it is to an organization, or even the commitment to a particular brand, for example, and we may have invested psychologically or emotionally in that, and we have these misperceived sunk costs there. We also always drive for consistency, where if we've been doing something up to now, there's a consistent, we like consistency. This is me, this is what I do, and now you're asking me to do something different. That's not me. So I'm driving for some kind of consistency. I'm a bit more reluctant, and I stick with the status quo because that's more consistent with who I am. And that's why, again, even changing politics, when people would say, it's very hard to get, the swing vote from one political party maybe to another, because people maybe have invested their identity and there's a consistency. I've always voted, Labour, I've always voted, whatever. And then the last one, which I always find fascinating, like regret avoidance. This is again back to Kahneman, where we actually are harder on ourselves if we have a bad outcome as a result of a decision, rather than a bad outcome that just happened and we had just been doing nothing different. If we just kept doing what we're doing and we got a bad outcome, versus we're just get a bad outcome having made a decision, we're much harder if we feel that we have taken an action. And just give you a little example. And some of you may have had this example yourselves and had to live through it, regret avoidance. You're on the way to the airport with your whoever your loved one happens to be, or best friend or whatever. And on the way, they say, you know what, I know a great shortcut. If you take a left up here, over that bridge, we'll be in the airport 20 minutes early. You follow their advice. Lo and behold, there is a traffic jam up there and you missed your flight. Compare that with you and your friend, loved one, whatever, heading to the airport. You take the route you always take, and you end up also in a traffic jam. Pretty sure that you will feel much worse in the first situation than in the second one, because you actually took an action that led, and you feel somehow, if I hadn't done that, this wouldn't have happened. Whereas if you just keep doing what you always did, you don't treat yourself quite as harshly on that. So if you take change and innovation, like if we're talking about change, if we're talking about innovation, if we're talking about at an individual, organization level, whatever, there's always a status quo. I mean, the change is the change from where we are. Innovation is a break of what we've always done. So there is always going to be a status quo, a current situation. So there's always something to let go of. And if you take that, how do we try to address the potential that the status quo could end up with us making a poorer decision, even though there could be a much better outcome in the future? The status quo may be pulling us back from making a better decision, us or our clients or our organization, and make it more difficult. So I'm going to ask Tanya to break us into, let's just take 5 minutes on this. I want you to just consider, this is just a hypothetical example. Now, you could bring your own experience into this, experience you've had with clients maybe, or just even think about it hypothetically. Think of a career or a role change decision, someone who's thinking about changing career or changing role. What might be some of the factors, do you think, both rational and maybe irrational, that might influence that decision? So I'm going to ask Tanya to maybe put you into breakout rooms. Just have a chat about this, and even feel free just to have a chat generally about what we've been covering anyway and share your experience. And I'll get you to put some stuff in the chat when we come back from the breakout. We'll just give you 5 minutes on that. And then I will share a framework with you. There can be, the investment. If you're in an organization, you've already built up a track record. You may be on a career ladder, depending on what stage you are in your career. And then there's also the investment in your profession. I remember for me, like I was in a technical role, I was an engineer, and then moved into people management. And really, once you move into people management, you don't go back to engineering again. And it's like leaving, it's almost drawing a line underneath that career and starting a new one. You're starting at the bottom rung of the ladder at one level. Regret avoidance, and that's that fear of failure, you know, that you've made a choice now. And if it fails, now you could also have your failure in your current role, but because you didn't make a choice, that's regret avoidance. You might be less harsh on yourself. And also that your past commitment to the organization, team, and the role, trying to remain you know, to keep consistent with that. So how might this shape, you know, now that we understand some of this, how might this shape some better coaching conversations? What I want to share with you is, this is my own thinking on this, okay? This is not off the shelf. This is something I've kind of developed in terms of how might we shape a conversation. So we'll come up with a little model, little framework, which you can adapt yourself, use some of it, all of it. But there's kind of 4 stages of how we might shape a coaching conversation. So just think back to where we began. Like the choice on the left-hand side, the choice of an A or a B is different if A is a status quo. So one of the things we should try to do is, could we reshape the choice on the right-hand side to look a little bit more like the choice on the left, to make it a bit more neutral? So here's the 4 stages that I'm proposing, okay? And it's the acronym will be REST, rest, okay? So the first thing is reframing. Secondly, evaluating. Thirdly, starting positive. And fourthly, transition. So that's just what that's the model. And we're going to talk you through each of these one at a time. So the first thing is the reframing. And this is, you know, the most powerful. This is where we start. To reframe the status quo, the existing condition, as an independent future option. So again, instead of saying like, okay, I'm in this current role and all I'm thinking about is, you know, the new role, but to put the current role side by side with the new one. So everything is now on the table. So we say, no, there is no default. If you decide to stay in the current role, that is also an active choice. It isn't just a default, it's an active choice. You're taking the A and the B. So the A is your current role, the B maybe is the new role, for example. And we're going to put the 2 choices side by side. That's the first part. So reframing, removing the status quo label, if you wish, from this and saying, no, we've got 2 choices, this one or this one, neither of which is a status quo. That's the first part. But that allows us then, when we've done that, to use the same evaluation criteria for, you know, both options, for the status quo, you know, the existing option and the future, which is typically not something we tend to do. And I just know this from you know, from even working with clients and working with organizations. Once at the status quo, a lot of the energy and a lot of the analysis is around the future and the transition, and very little about where we currently are. And people don't look about the disadvantages of what currently is taking place at all. I've seen this particularly in organizational change, where the current situation is rarely looked at. It's all about the future piece. So this is the suggestion here is, after we've done the reframing, to evaluate both clinically with the same pros and cons of whatever situation or whatever framework, maybe a different framework you want to use, but use exactly the same criteria for both. And what I'd also say is avoid including the transition costs at this stage. So if there's anything to do with the transition, I want to leave that to the end. So evaluate the end states only. The third piece, starting positive. Because we tend to weigh, as I said earlier, losses more than gains. And also, if you go back to query theory, we say like the sequence in which we look at something, the evaluation does depend on how we evaluate does depend on the sequence of how we look at things. We're better off to begin with looking at the positives first before we look at the negatives for multiple reasons. One is kind of that we could be anchored into the negatives, but also because of that weighing of the negatives and being, you know, overly weighted. We should always start with, let's put up the positives for both cases first. So the existing and the future case, and start from there. And again, don't look at transition. And finally, now we get to it. Now that we've done all of this, we've reframed, we've done the evaluation, we've looked at the positive first. Now we look at the transition. And only at this point should we look at the transition. And there may be a rational cost that we have to evaluate here. But I think crucially what we should do here is we should separate out short-term disruption versus long-term, transition costs. So there could be a long-term, ongoing cost to the change, or long-term effect. But that's different than, a pure transition cost. If you take it, is just something that's going to be temporarily. So if you go back to I was talking about someone starting implementing a new IT system. Yes, there will be a transition cost in learning the new system. There'll probably be bugs in the system. There'll probably be a bit of pain to go through, but out the other end, yes, it'll be worth it. That's different than if there's an ongoing, if this is going to increase workload. Hopefully a new IT system wouldn't. It would hopefully reduce the workload. But the longer term effect separated from that. So look at the transition cost at the very end, separate out the short-term disruption versus the long-term losses, and then combine with the rest of the analysis. So I think if we take those 4 steps, we have a much better chance, again, working with a client or working with an organization, to get a better assessment. And also gets a little bit over the bounded rationality, because now putting a bit more structure on this. If we just leave it to chance and have a standard coaching conversation, we're more likely to focus on the transition, more likely to focus on the downsides, and we may be anchored back into staying where we are rather than moving. So this is a way of framing that conversation to get a better conversation around change, and hopefully that the person is still making up their mind, or the organization, what has to be done. If working with an individual from a coaching point of view, they're coming up with a better outcome because we as coaches have shaped the conversation a bit better. Just to give you one quote, I always include a quote. Tanya always knows this. I always include a quote. This is Manny Duke, her book, Quit, The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away. It's a great book. It's not just to do with status quo bias, by the way. It's just a good book around quitting versus sticking with things. And I really like what she has to say here. She says, success doesn't lie in sticking to things. It lies in picking the right things to stick to and quitting the rest. And she gives lots of examples. For example, I think one of her first examples is Muhammad Ali probably stayed as a professional fighter far too long and should have quit earlier. So that's Annie Duke, Quit. I think that's a quote to leave you with. But I do have to leave you with this, because it's status quo bias. It would be remiss of me not to have a picture of status quo. So I'll have to include that anyway. So thank you for your time. I know Tanya wants to round off a little bit here with what's coming up next. So will I leave the slides up, Tanya, or?
Yeah, you can leave them up. You can leave them up, Billy. You can leave your good dad joke at the end there. It's status quo. I love it. Yeah, very, very briefly, folks, just to finish up and say thanks so much to everybody for being here. We're back again on the 22nd of March with the lovely Anne Phillipson, who's here today. Anne will be bringing all of her international career and experience and wisdom to us next month. And she's looking at a session on cultural intelligence. It's all about how we can best work with people of different cultures, what it means for organizations, what it means for our relationships. So really, really looking forward to that one, Anne. It's going to be a pleasure to have you for that session.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah, really, really looking forward.
You can kill the slide, Billy.
That was a much nicer one than status quo, and we leave that one up there. So thanks so much, everybody, for taking the time to be here. I know it's not easy to find the time for these things, so we're always grateful when people join us. The recording of today's session and the slides will be available in the Dirty Salad Club LinkedIn group. So for any of you that are new here, we don't share them publicly, but if you go into LinkedIn, you search for Dirty Salad Club, Club with a K, you can join the group there and you'll have access to all the recordings and the slides. If anyone would like to host a future session, any questions, curiosities for any of us at KinchLyons, you can get us at info@kinchlyons.com. Very lastly, huge thanks to Billy. That was great. Billy, I love your sessions. There's information and there's learning and there's always something practical, tangible that we can take away, and it's relatively easy to put into practice really soon. So super useful, and thank you so much.
And thank you everybody for showing up today and being here on a Friday and giving up your Friday lunchtime. Have a great weekend. Oh, and get in touch with us, any of you who'd like to follow up on anything that we've covered there today. And when you see the slides, those research titles are there, and you can follow up and do a bit of reading in your spare time. So thank you so much. It's great to be with you today.
Thanks,
Brilliant.
folks.
Thanks, Billy.
Hope to see you all
Thank
again
you.
soon. Bye bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Billy.
you.
Thanks, Tanya. Bye.
Bye.